Hello, my name is Alan Goode. I'm the CEO and Chief Analyst at Goode Intelligence, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to explore trends in authentication and identity for European commerce. For those of you that do not know Goode Intelligence, we're an analyst, consulting, and events business that operates in the three interconnected areas of authentication, biometrics, and identity. We work internationally with technology vendors, service providers, and end users, and our services have been designed to inform, educate, and influence. Our clients include super brands right through to hot, emerging startups and market disruptors, including FIDO authentication vendors. This is the summary for my presentation today and draws on a number of current active projects that we're currently engaged on for our clients. For commerce in Europe, PSD2's strong customer authentication, SCA, is having a significant impact in how authentication services are being designed and deployed. As such, I shall be concentrating on the status of SCA adoption for my presentation today. I should explore the status on SCA adoption with an investigation on adoption rates, its impact on fraud, and what we're seeing in relation to transaction declines, abandonments, and failures, payment attrition, the negative knock-on effects of SCA. I should then turn my attention to answer a question. We have SCA compliance, what next? With the focus on SCA compliance to meet country deadlines, what do banks and payment processors need to do to ensure SCA compliance is maintained, but also to ensure that authentication systems meet the demands of today's ever-changing commerce requirements? To conclude, I'll explore what opportunities exist for FIDO-based authentication, systems that are SCA compliant and also in tune with other requirements. I'm sure this is very familiar to people that are tuning in today, but a quick recap on what is PSD2 SCA. Under PSD2, payment service providers will be obliged to apply strong customer authentication when a payer initiates an electronic payment transaction. The European Commission defines SCA as a process that validates the identity of the user of a payment service or of the payment transaction. And SCA is based on use of two or more elements: knowledge, something only the user knows, e.g. password or PIN; possession, something only the user has, e.g. a card or an authentication code or a mobile phone; inherence, something that the user is, e.g. via biometric authenticators such as fingerprint, voice, iPrint, or behavioral. SCA became a legal requirement on the 14th of September 2019, and the European Banking Authority, the EBA, mandated that the requirements would be fully enforced on the 1st of January 2021. Individual European countries developed their own guidelines for compliance, like their own timeline for compliance. France with the 15th of May 2021, and the UK announcing gradual enforcement on the 1st of June 2021, and the full enforcement the 14th of March 2020, which is last Monday. Full SCA compliance has not been a big bang event with full compliance happening from day one, but rather a planned deployment with countries opting to ramp up SCA compliant payment transactions. All European countries have full SCA enforcement, as I said, with the UK enforcement last week on the 14th of March. Let's take a look at where we are with SCA with adoption rates. The payments industry is at the start of its journey with implementing SCA and has rightly focused on being compliant with SCA, with local SCA regulation. The percentage of transactions processed through SCA compliant authentication rails is high in Europe. Analysis from the European Banking Authority shows by April 2021, 94% of all payment cards in the Eurozone were SCA enabled. 99% of merchants supported SCA, and 92% of authentication requests were SCA compliant. FIDO Secure 3DS is seen to be closely aligned to the technical characteristics of SCA and a method of becoming SCA compliant, with a high percentage of card issuers supporting the latest 3DS version, which is 3DS2. SCA was introduced to reduce payment fraud within Europe, and there is strong evidence that this has been the case. Fraud rates are declining in regions that have implemented SCA. The European Banking Authority has confirmed that the average value of fraudulent card transactions across the EU has fallen by 50% for issuers between June 2020 and April 2021. So it's gone down from 0.12% of transactions down to 0.06% of transactions. A similar story has been observed for acquirers, with 40% reduction in fraud rates, which is a 0.14% to 0.12%. As 3DS support is seen as a method to comply with SCA, figures from Visa relate to the rising adoption of 3DS and reported fraud falling by 20% from January to May 2021. Evidence of rising adoption of 3DS is compounded by LexisNexis in its cybercrime report for the period January to June 2021, where it detailed a 623% growth in 3DS transactions year on year, and an e-commerce attack rate declined by 36% in the preceding 12 months. The reduction in fraud rates as a result of SCA measures is incredibly positive news. But as we know with newly developed anti-fraud and security technologies, there can be knock-on effects on other areas of the authentication process. What has been the cost of SCA compliance to the business of payment processing? There's always a trade-off between security and convenience, and there is evidence the needle may have shifted too far towards the security side of the dial at the expense of convenience for consumers. And this includes unnecessary customer friction, poor customer experience, payment attrition, and increased customer interaction with contact centers. SCA compliant authentication technology, including the use of one-time passwords generated by apps or delivered via SMS and mobile apps managed by card issuers, is adding friction to the payment process. If you interrupt the online payment journey with too much friction, there is concern that consumers will choose to abandon the session. As a result of this, retailers will lose business and payment service providers will see a reduction in processing fees. There was also evidence that a number of large merchants have not permanently turned on SCA due to a fear of basket abandonment and customer declines as a result of additional friction to the payment process. So with poor customer experience in this always-on digital world, if you provide customers with poor customer experience, then they will go elsewhere. Authentication is a vital part of the customer experience, and if not designed with the customer at the core, there is a real possibility of abandonment. With the current focus on SCA compliance, there has been criticism of inadequate investment in making authentication easy to use and convenient. If the consumer experience is poor, then there's a risk that it may act as a catalyst to greater adoption of open banking and instant payment options, competitors to card-based payment systems. The goal of designing a consumer-focused authentication solution is to make the overall payment experience of customers better with a streamlined authentication process. Now, there have also been documented issues with the deployment of SCA technologies that include an increase in transaction failure rates, payment attrition, rejected transactions, and abandonment in the payment process because of increased friction for consumers. There's been criticism from European trade bodies that there's been too much focus on compliance versus implementation and the need for convenient and easy to use transaction authorization. An example of this criticism from European trade bodies comes from Eurocommerce, who wrote an open letter to the EBA in April 2021, detailing issues with its members seeing an increase in transaction failure rates. This increase in failure rates has been identified by the consulting company CMSPI, who claim that post-SCA, there's been a 30% payment failure transaction rate across Europe. They define failure rate as the proportion of transactions that are abandoned by the consumer or declined by the issuer when challenged through 3DS2. The target failure rate is between 5 and 10%. And they've calculated that this has come at an 86 billion euro cost to merchants operating in Europe. Also, figures from Microsoft paint a picture of low SCA success rates and high challenge and abandonment rates. Microsoft has been monitoring SCA transactions through its network and has been regularly publishing these under the title of the Microsoft SCA scorecard. The overall picture for Europe, excluding the UK, in November was authentication success rates at 71%, which was considered too low. Challenge rates at 72%, considered too high, and abandonment rates at 15%, also considered too high. Communication with customers on the impact of SCA to their payment experience is an important part of ensuring that the migration to SCA technology is as smooth as possible. It also ensures that customer contact centers are not overwhelmed with customers trying to resolve issues caused by SCA. This could be queries on how a particular new SCA compliant authentication solution works, customer confusion, or as a result of having a payment fail or be declined. My thoughts on the use of SMS delivered OTPs, which is probably the most widely deployed SCA authentication mechanism, and one that is widely used around the world as part of a 2FA or MFA solution. SMS OTP is an easy to deploy 2FA solution, but doesn't require an app on a mobile device. It raises the bar to deter a number of authentication attacks, but does have some well-known weaknesses, including the risk from SIM swap attacks. The European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, defines SIM swapping as a legitimate procedure performed by a customer to change their SIM card when the SIM card has been lost or damaged or stolen, or they change to a new device with another SIM card format, or they move to another provider, which is called number portability. Attackers abuse the provider's ability to quickly and seamlessly port a telephone number to a device containing a different subscriber identity model, SIM. As a result, the attacker takes over the account and can receive all the SMS and voice calls intended for the legitimate subscriber. Fraudsters can perform online banking frauds, but also circumvent the 2FA used to secure social media and other online accounts. So SIM swap is a major problem with high levels of fraud internationally. There's been a number of high-profile SIM swap cases, with the ex-CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, having his own Twitter account hacked, and the food blogger Jack Monroe in the UK losing £5,000 from her bank account, both victims of SIM swap attacks in 2020. Around the world, we have evidence of the financial impact of SIM swap. In Australia, the Australian Communications and Media Authority analysis discovered that between January and May 2021, more than 80% of mobile number fraud resulted from unauthorized SIM swaps. The US reported in February 2022 from the FBI that from January 2018 to December 2020, the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, received 320 complaints related to SIM swapping incidents with adjusted losses of approximately $12 million. In 2021, ICA received 1,611 SIM swapping complaints with adjusted losses of more than $68 million. Figures from Action Fraud in the UK, which is the National Fraud Reporting Centre, show the number also of people falling victim as a result of SIM swap has increased substantially since 2015 by 400%. And that has resulted in losses of more than £10 million to UK consumers. Action Fraud found 483 reports in June 2020, almost twice the number for the same period of the previous year. In 2015, there were just 144 cases. Action Fraud received nearly twice as many reports of SIM swap fraud in the first half of 2020 as the same period in the previous year, with £483,000 stolen during this period. There are tools that access mobile network operator data to check whether a subscriber has recently swapped the SIM to detect this type of fraud. But there's also evidence that banks and payment providers are looking at alternatives and starting the process of removing their dependence on SMS delivered OTPs. So, with good levels of SCA compliance and falling payment fraud levels, it is time to concentrate efforts onto the problem areas that SCA is causing and introduce measures that can increase acceptance rates, reduce declines and failures, reduce the level of friction, make it easier for consumers to make payments online, detect previously undetected fraud, and look to replace SMS delivered OTPs. Authentication solutions must be able to work for both web-based and mobile commerce and tightly fit into the transaction processing workflow. I believe there is currently too much friction in the transaction processing workflow, and this is causing some of the negative aspects of SCA that we've identified in this presentation. So do these problems with SCA compliance provide an opportunity for FIDO-based authentication? I believe that there is an opportunity to leverage standards-based authentication solution that works for both web and mobile commerce channels. FIDO is now a mature and trusted authentication solution in use by major organizations globally. As SCA is a high-level technical standard that does not recommend specific authentication systems, each payment processor can design and deploy their own technology, with the proviso that it has to comply with SCA standards. This creates a user experience problem for consumers, especially those that are signed up with multiple payment card issuers and payment processors, in that for each of these payment authentication process may be different. By adopting FIDO certified authentication solutions that are also SCA compliant, the problems of security and usability could be mitigated. We're already seeing signs of this happening. In 2021, Visa acquired Login ID to make it easier for companies to integrate FIDO certified authentication into the payments processing lifecycle. FIDO can also support SCA and 3DS and delegated authentication. Additionally, delegated authentication provides a way for merchants to manage their authentication process themselves and improve the customer experience, and could reduce the number of abandonments that we're seeing with SCA implementations at the moment. So to sum up, SCA, strong customer authentication, is now a legal requirement across the UK and the UK, with the UK's deadline occurring 1 week ago on Monday, the 14th of March. Figures show us that adoption rates for SCA is high, and analysis from the EBA shows by April 2021, 94% of all payment cards in the Eurozone were SCA enabled, 99% of merchants supported SCA, and 92% of authentication requests were SCA compliant. Fraud rates are declining in regions that have implemented SCA. The EBA has confirmed that the average value of fraudulent card transactions across the EU has fallen by 50% for issuers between June 2021 and April 2021. The adoption of 3DS is also helping in reducing fraud rates. As we all know, getting the balance right with customer authentication can be tricky. Too much friction can frustrate consumers and they will go elsewhere. Conversely, too little friction can worry customers used to being prompted for an action to authorize a payment. The increase in failure rates has been identified by the consulting company CMSPI, who claim that post-SCA there has been 30% payment failure transaction rate across Europe. They define the failure rate as the proportion of transactions that are abandoned by the consumer or declined by the issuer when challenged through 3DS2. The target rate is between 5 and 10%, and they claim they've calculated that this is a hit of 86 billion euros for the merchants operating in Europe. Also, figures from Microsoft paint a picture of low SCA success rates and high challenged abandonment rates. So what can the industry do to ensure they remain SCA compliant, but also iron out some of these niggling problems that we're seeing? Good levels of SCA compliance and falling payment fraud levels, it is time to concentrate efforts onto the problem areas that SCA is causing and introduce measures that can increase acceptance rates, reduce declines and failures, reduce level of friction, make it easier for consumers to make payments online, detect previously undetected fraud, and look to replace SMS-delivered OTPs. These failings could open the door for FIDO certified authentication solutions that could maintain SCA compliance, improve security by replacing OTP, improve usability, and create a uniform standards-based authentication solution that could be common across payment issuers and also provide a method for merchants to support delegated authentication. Thank you for tuning into my presentation today. I do hope that it's been valuable to you. Please do not hesitate in contacting me if you have any questions on this presentation or want to hear more about the work that we do at Goode Intelligence. Thank you.